Afternoon, everybody, and welcome once again to the Life After F1 workshop. I will just allow our special guests here to introduce themselves. I'm Jocasta Brents-Watson, Director of the Office of Global Learning, and with me is also Allison Jackson, Associate Director for Global Learning. David, they're all yours.
Thanks so much. So thank you so much, Jocasta, Allison, for inviting us to make this presentation. It's always a pleasure to be able to support the international student body at St. Peter's. And I am going to let Ludka make the introduction first. Ladies first.
Thank you very much, David. So my name is Ludka Zimovcak. I'm an immigration attorney. I've been practicing for about 17, 18 years. I cannot remember. Most of it with
rounded off to 20 at this point, right?
Yeah, getting there. So our firm concentrates just on immigration law. It's Canadian and US immigration, and we handle all types of immigration matters. So we help students, we help other individuals, families, companies, we do asylums, removal, so anything related to immigration that you can think of. So it's not just the students, even though we enjoy helping students, and it's very rewarding, especially when we have a student and we take student from student, then being in F1 status, then work visa, green card, citizenship, then they turn around, apply for their parents or siblings. So it's a really rewarding type of law in case you want to get into immigration. We have our main office, it's in Ridgewood, New Jersey. We have another office in Raritan as well. We just opened office in Florida, but I just want to mention immigration is federal, so it really doesn't matter where we are. We can help anyone. We actually have clients outside of the US, not just in the US. So it doesn't really matter wherever you are. And I'm going to turn it to David.
Thanks so much, Ludka. So I'll just let everyone who's on this webinar know that Ludka happens to be one of the most humble immigration lawyers I know, and she is an absolutely phenomenal attorney who really, one of her passions is, and I think she alluded to this, is helping students, and represents academic institutions throughout the United States and lent support to international student officers such as yours on a regular basis whenever an issue might come up. Sometimes there's a behind the scenes kind of thing that goes on where we work directly with the international student officers to make sure that they're doing the very best that they possibly can for you guys. So, it really is a pleasure that I have to be able to work with her. Unfortunately, one of the things that I found over time, I've been practicing for now about 30 years, and my time has been constrained significantly, where it's difficult for me to focus as much as I would like to on some of the issues that come up on a daily basis. And Luke is able to give extreme focus and hand-holding to the ISOs and DSOs, which is really phenomenal. So as Lucas said, we've been practicing for a long time. Some people actually joke around that we're like an old married couple. And we're really happy to make this presentation for you because it's so important for you guys to know not just about OPT, although I understand from a discussion with Jocasta earlier that you guys have had your OPT workshop, so you understand what OPT is and how it works. But OPT is sort of a step, it's a stepping stone, if you will, toward a longer term work permit and ultimately a green card. And for some of you, ultimately citizenship in the United States, if that's what you choose to do. So one of the things that Ludka and I hope to do today is to explain to you how the US immigration law system works, and then focus in on what's probably extremely time sensitive and important to you, and that is how to go about working with the H-1B lottery that's going to be coming up during the month of March. So with that, Luca was good enough to put up a slide here, which is sort of near and dear to our hearts, because what it does is it helps me to explain to you guys how the U.S. immigration law system works. And this slide is really a snapshot of the U.S. immigration law system. And it's important for you to understand that the U.S. immigration law system is a spectrum. The spectrum runs from the left-hand side of this chart to the right-hand side of the chart. And so we like to take you through these various categories and to help you understand what the normal, I guess you would say, life cycle is in the immigration system. So I'm going to start with the first section, and that is for individuals who have no status in the United States. And you might think, okay, well, you know, if an individual doesn't have status in the US, that there are no options that might be available to them, but that's actually not the case. And Luca and I on a daily basis encounter individuals who don't have status, but, you know, who want to stay in the United States. And so we're sort of charged with being able to look for options if they exist. And oftentimes that requires us to do a full-blown analysis by asking you questions which you might not think are pertinent, but for us are extremely pertinent. So things like, when did you enter the United States? And when, if at all, you did a certain type of filing, were you ever the victim of a crime, and so on. So there are certain things that, you know, what we need to do is we need to ask you these questions in order to fully understand what potential opportunities you may be able to have to immigrate to the US. So I do see that somebody posted a question in the chat, and I would encourage you as we go to post any questions that you have in the chat. I know that Luke is pretty good about and you know what we try to do is answer those questions as we go. I think Luke is a faster typer than I am, so she'll be able to answer those questions for you. But going to that first classification there on the chart is individuals with no status. So again, you would think that there may not be options for them, but there actually are a few options. So for example, an individual who entered the United States at a certain time may be able to take advantage of what's called DACA. DACA is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. These are individuals who enter the United States. Usually they were brought to the United States by their parents, and they really don't know anything other than, you know, being in the United States. And oftentimes they don't find out that, you know, they're out of status until actually they apply to college. And then all of a sudden the question comes, what is your status? And they start to talk to their parents, and their parents say, oh, well, you know, we brought you here and you didn't have status. So, so this was a program that was introduced by President Obama back in the day. And what it does is it allows individuals who are dreamers to be able to get work authorization and to stay in the United States, but it's not a pathway to citizenship. Unfortunately, it just gives them work authorization. And so DACA was recently made a regulation. So there are regulations that deal with DACA, but unfortunately, again, it's not yet a clear pathway to citizenship. The next on the list there is the U visa. The U visa is for individuals who are victims of certain crimes. So an individual who, let's say, is the victim of a felonious assault, or the individual who is the victim of false imprisonment or harassment might be able to apply for a U visa. It's important that if you ever become the victim of a certain crime, it's a great idea to get a police report. And if you've been harmed in some way, then, you know, to do a hospital record. You know, so these are things that would help us as lawyers to be able to do a U visa for you. And, you know, even if you're a student, you can apply for a U visa if you were the victim of a certain crime. Also, if you have evidence or information that's helpful to the federal government, you might also be able to apply for a U visa. The next benefit there is what's called 245I. 245I is a benefit that's available to individuals who did a qualified filing prior to April 30th of 2001. And you guys may think, well, you know, that was a long time ago, and I probably didn't do a qualified filing because that was before I was born. But if your parents did a qualified filing, you're allowed to inherit the benefit from them. So oftentimes, Ludka and I will drill down and ask you whether your parents made a qualified filing prior to April 30th of 2001, because then what we would do is see whether we can maybe get that benefit to you from them. Another benefit listed there is asylum. Asylum is a credible fear of persecution for returning to your home country. An individual who is a student can also apply for asylum at the same time. And again, the idea there is that asylum ultimately gives you the opportunity to apply for a green card. One that's not listed on here is TPS. TPS is temporary protected status. Individuals from certain countries that are designated by the Attorney General's office are allowed to apply for work authorization under a special program called TPS. These would be Ukrainians, people from
Nepal,
Nepal,
Venezuela.
Venezuela, exactly. And so there's a whole list of countries that qualify for TPS. And also, which is not listed here, is individuals who marry US citizens. That's another way to get a benefit in the United States. If you marry a US citizen, you can apply for a green card in the United States. So these are ways to solve the problems for individuals who don't have status. But what's more pertinent probably to you all is that you have F-1 student status in the United States, and you are bona fide non-immigrants. So what I'm going to do is hand over to Ludka an explanation about non-immigrants and a dichotomy or distinction that exists between non-immigrants that are pure non-immigrants and non-immigrants with dual intent. So Ludka?
Thank you, David. And I just want to chime in that obviously as students, you can file for asylum, U visa, or TPS, and we get a lot of questions from students. How does it affect the F-1 status? It's really important to maintain the F-1. You don't have to, but it's better. I'm going to give you an example with asylum. If you let go your F-1 status, you just rely on your asylum application and it's not successful, you're going to end up in removal proceedings. So it's always safer to have a backup option. So if you're thinking about filing an U visa or going with the TPS, I mean, the best probably choice would be to maintain your F-1. So just make sure that you discuss it with someone because it can get complicated, especially with the TPS, because you get work permit. And what if you're not authorized under F-1 and how does it work? Just remember that you never know when the TPS will end, or you never know if your asylum application will be successful or not. So it's just a little side note. So most of you are, I'm assuming, F-1 students or maybe J-1s. So this is a purely non-immigrant intent visa category. So you're all non-immigrants, but within non-immigrant visa category, we have two subcategories, pure non-immigrant intent, and then we have dual intent visa status. And if you're thinking to stay in the United States more permanently, and I see somebody was already asking a question about EB3, that's a type of immigrant category, that's a type of a green card category. It's always safer if you first secure more stable, long-term dual intent visa status before you jump into green card application. So of course, David mentioned marriage case. If that's the case, you're getting married to US citizen, that's fine. But otherwise, if you can, or if it's possible, it's always better to just have more secure dual intent status, such as H-1B or L-1 or other categories. Because as a student, as an F-1 student, you had to show at the US Embassy, or if you were changing your status within the United States, that you will not immigrate, you will not stay permanently in the US, and you have strong ties to your home country. So pretty much if you would have said at the port of entry that, oh, I want to stay, I want to move permanently to the United States, you probably would be denied the entry, because you, with the F-1 status, you should have a pure non-immigrant intent, meaning you're going to be returning after your studies back to your home country after completing your OPT. So if you can, the idea is to get more stable status. And once you have it, then you can start looking on the green card side. And we have a next column which says immigrant or green card. It's the same. So lawful permanent resident or green card holder.
Immigrant, they all mean the same.
They all mean the same. And, you know, if you decide to go with the green card and you have a relative, you have mom or dad that is a green card holder, US citizen, you definitely can pursue several green card options as well. And we get that question all the time. So, for example, if you have an employer that is willing to sponsor you for EB3, but at the same time you have a relative that can sponsor you based on family immigration, you can do it and see which one goes first. In addition, if your country qualifies, you can do green card lottery, DV lottery that starts in October. That's not a problem at all. As many options as you have, better for you. Even with an employment-based green card category, if you qualify, we have a lot of people that do both EB1 and EB2. And of course, lastly, once you have your green card, after 5 years, you can apply for US citizenship. If you're married to US citizen, it's after 3 years. You don't have to become US citizen. So we know some people that, you know, just they stay permanent residents for forever, for a really long time. If you are thinking about citizenship in the future, just make sure that you check with your own country if they allow dual citizenship. US does, but you need to check with your country because some countries do not allow dual citizenship, so you may lose your own. So in the future, for planning purposes, you know, you should find out. Okay.
Great. So, Ludka, this slide is the typical path to a green card generally for students. So I would say that the optional practical training part of this slide was covered in the OPT workshop that Yocasta and Allison did for the students. And I presume that they also covered the STEM OPT opportunities for those folks who are studying in the science, technology, engineering, or mathematics field. And what we know there is that new doors were opened by the Biden administration for some additional, I believe it was about 42 additional majors that were deemed to be STEM OPT majors. So that was a nice, you know, a nice change under the law. And then most folks will go to H-1B as an employee after, you know, working in OPT for the employer, and then they'll start to look to the green card. So this is the typical path that an individual would take, a student, international student would take in order to get the green card.
And of course, it's not up for everyone. It's just typical path, as David mentioned. That's important word. So there are people that may have completely different way of getting the green card. They may be from, and we are going to talk about alternatives to H-1B. And there are some options that are better than the H-1B. H-1B is great, but it's not ideal right now because there are not enough of the H-1Bs. And we're going to talk about the lottery. So don't take it that this is a must. Generally speaking, most of the students will go that route.
Right, and Ludka, I think let's just give an example of you know, where a student might go in a different direction would be, let's say you have a student who is offered a job with a religious organization, and they're going to be working, let's say, in a church or in a synagogue or in a mosque. then of course they could go the route of an R1 and seek a green card going down that road. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But again, generally H-1B is the road that students usually take. So, what is an H-1B? You know, we keep throwing around this this acronym H-1B. So, what H-1B is it's a professional and specialty occupation worker. And what is a professional and specialty occupation worker? Well, that is an individual who has the equivalence of a U.S. baccalaureate degree. Okay, and also in order to get an H-1B, the job offer that's being made by the prospective H-1B employer needs to require at least a bachelor's degree. And so in order to prove that an individual has a bachelor's degree, how do you do that? Well, number one, you have the bachelor's degree, so that's easy, right? So if you have a US bachelor's degree. Another way that it can be done is that you can show that the individual has education at home. So foreign equivalency can be used in order to demonstrate that the individual has the equivalence of a US baccalaureate degree. And that would require us as lawyers to send you to an equivalency evaluation company, and there are many of them in the United States here, where what they will do is make a determination as to whether or not the academic background that you have from home qualifies you to have the equivalence of a US baccalaureate degree. The other thing is you can use experience. So 3 years of work experience in a particular field is equal to 1 year of academic study. And so, for example, if you have 12 years of experience, that could potentially equate to a US baccalaureate degree. So again, there are several ways in which you can show that you have the equivalence of a US baccalaureate degree. And I think the most important thing that Lutka and I want to point out to you is that some of you may actually, based upon either experience or education that you have prior to the educational background that you're getting now, you may already have the equivalence of a US baccalaureate degree, but that's to be determined by, of course, again, this educational or experiential equivalency company.
And there are many of those, so you can get that done easily. If you have a foreign degree, for example,
Exactly.
you can contact any credentials evaluation agency and they'll do it in no time.
Yeah, they do it, you know, you can reach them on the internet, and, you know, you can submit copies of your academic transcripts and diplomas if you have them, training materials, and then they can do an evaluation for you as to, you know, what you have being the equivalence to a US baccalaureate degree.
So these are just some examples of specialty occupations that David mentioned. So these are easy ones: engineers, chemists, IT professionals, teachers, doctors. But of course, there are a lot more occupations. So the key here is that minimum of a bachelor's degree is required for that particular position. So the question is, what is normally required? And we actually do check Department of Labor's website, or there are several actually resources that we check. It's ONET, you can find it online, or there is a dictionary of occupational titles, and then OOH, which stands for Occupational Outlook Handbook. And you will be able to find most of the occupations and what is the minimum requirement for the position. So in some cases, it's going to be very gray, where it's not clear. It's still possible to prove specialty occupation. For example, the company can show that they historically always required bachelor's degree because of the complexity of the job, for example. So there are definitely ways to prove specialty occupation, but the key here is that your major or your degree and the occupation match, or we can at least show some nexus. Because you may have a master's degree or even PhD, but if the position doesn't require at least a bachelor's degree, it's not going to work. This is not going to be H-1B material. And we've seen cases where companies just filed or did H-1B registrations. And then when they came to us, we said, we cannot help you because the position just is not a professional one and it's not in specialty occupation. So it's always good to do analysis to see if it's going to work for the H-1B purposes.
So Ludka, let's give the listeners to this webinar a solid example of where something like that happened, because last year an individual came into us. They said that they had won the H-1B lottery, and he was the owner of a diner who did an H-1B for his cashier. And he asked us to do the H-1B for the cashier. So is that a professional and specialty occupation position?
No. And I'm assuming that the person had the degree, if I remember correctly. So, obviously different position, even though it's a diner, may work. Some type of operations coordinator or manager, managing maybe several diners, it may work, but cashier itself, probably not.
Exactly. So, as Ludka was saying, one of the things that we would do is look to the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, which is available to you online. It's a U.S. Department of Labor publication. The Occupational Outlook Handbook is also available to you online, and ONET is also available to you online. And these are the guidelines that the U.S. Department of Labor has put out to help us to understand whether or not a position is or is not, quote unquote, professional in nature.
So we are very, very close, dangerously close to the H-1B registration. It's fairly new process. This is a 4th season. I cannot believe it. It just seems it was implemented yesterday. It's much better than it was in the past. We had to file every case on April 1st. Now there is kind of like a pre-registration that runs on March 1st until actually now it's going to be till March, not 18, it's going to be till March 17. So this is the only time that the employers have to register potential applicants. So it's not you. So even if you have the job, it's not you who is doing a H-1B registration. You need a company that is going to do registration. It's $10, so it's not significant. Registration is done only once a year. And of course, because there are just not enough H-1Bs, there are a lot more applicants for the H-1B. Usually we know the result by April 1st. So usually like March 30th or 31st, we know who was selected. And then the actual filing starts on April 1st and runs until June 30th. So all the petitions have to be filed during that time, those that were selected. We had for the, I think, first 2 years, we had second lottery and third lottery. Why? Because there were some, as I mentioned, the H-1B petitions had to be filed until June 30th. There were people that were selected, maybe they had multiple registrations and they didn't use the number. So then they did second and third lottery. This past season, we didn't have second or third lottery. There was just one. In fact, what USCIS did, they selected a lot more people. They selected around 120,000 people for 85,000 H-1B numbers. So just to go again through the deadlines. So right now our deadline is March 1st till March 17 for H-1B registration. Whoever is selected will start filing on April 1st, but we have time until June 30th. And remember that the H-1B really starts on October 1st. So even if H-1B is approved, it doesn't start until October 1st. And if it was filed as a change of status, then automatically the person will get H-1B on October 1st. The status will be changed automatically. For F-1s, it's really nice because they can use cap gap extension. So as long as, H-1B petition is filed, as long as the H-1B petition is filed timely, the OPT can be extended until October 1st. And for all other people in different status, for example, in H4 or F2, filing an H-1B, they have to make sure they have legal status until October 1st. That's very important. And I'm going to just jump to this slide just to explain the numbers. So we have 65,000 H-1Bs per year, additional 20,000 for those with US master's degree and higher. So we have 85,000 in total. And last year, there were close to 500,000 H-1B registrations. So that's why there is a lottery. And unfortunately, it's not a greatest chance. It's definitely better for those with the US master's degree. That's why it's important to start early, especially if you're eligible for the STEM OPT. Don't wait and start with the H-1B. Have your employer start really early on. That's really important, because if you don't make it the first year, then you can apply it second year. And if not, then hopefully the third year, you're going to make it in a H-1B lottery. Okay.
So the period of validity for an H-1B, and this is the reason why it's so powerful as a visa, as a work visa, is that it's good for an initial grant of 3 years with a 3-year extension. And any time that you spend outside the United States, and that's any time that you spend outside the United States, even let's say for a weekend you go abroad, that can be recaptured. And recapture is important for us, depending upon what country you're from, because if you're from a backlogged country, such as India or China, we may have to recapture some time and use that time for you. And one of the other tools that we use with regard to recapturing or using additional time is that we have an opportunity, if you're into the green card process at a certain point, we can get 3-year incremental extensions beyond the 6 years. So you can continue to extend in 3-year increments, assuming that you have an approved I-140, or if you have a perm application that's pending for 1 year, you can get 1-year incremental extensions. So there is definitely a benefit if you're from one of these backlog countries to initiate the green card process sooner rather than later, because then you have an opportunity to be able to continue to extend this H-1B in these 3-year increments. So, so the normal trek for our Indian and Chinese clients, students, is to have them sort of initiate a discussion with the employer about the green card sooner rather than later.
H-1B is employer specific. And I saw a question somebody asked. So it's not you. You need a company or organization that will file your H-1B. And once you get the H-1B, it's going to be tied to the company that filed the H-1B. So you have to be working for the company. H-1, however, if you get a new job, you get a new offer, you can transfer your H-1B to the new employer. So the new employer will have to file the H-1B petition, but you're not going to be subject to the lottery again. So it's much easier than the initial one, which is nice. You can have also 2 H-1Bs. That's called concurrent H-1B. So for example, you have H-1B with company A for 20 hours, for example, and then you have concurrent H-1B with company B for another 20 hours. So that's totally fine, and which leads me to the next point, that the part-time employment is totally fine. You don't have to have full-time employment for the H-1B purposes, and you're not going to have better chance in making it in a lottery if it's full-time. It really doesn't matter. We never had an issue with the part-time H-1B. And just going back to the lottery, it doesn't matter what country you're from, what kind of degree you have. It's just totally random. The only advantage there is for people having US advanced degree. So that's probably the only one. And not every school will qualify. So it needs to be either public or, if it's private, it has to be nonprofit. That's important.
So in the chat, I see a question, and I'm not sure if I'm answering the question properly, but someone is asking whether or not doing an H-1B affects their F-1. And I think that the answer to that is that if you get an H-1B approved, it does affect the F-1, because then, of course, you're going to H-1B as a form of status. So you'd be changing your status from F-1 to H-1B. But what a lot of people don't realize is you can study on an H-1. So you can actually work and study. However, the predominant amount of time that you spend should be, obviously, if you're studying, it should be on the F-1 and not the H-1B. But you can definitely study on an H-1B. That is permissible.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a really great point, Luca, about the part-time H-1B. And I think that I concur with you with regard to H-1Bs, is that I've never had a problem doing part-time H-1B. And I find that in this economy now, where there are issues with regard to the federally mandated prevailing wage, which we're going to talk about in a second, which is part and parcel of doing the H-1B, employers would be more apt to offer an individual a part-time position as opposed to a full-time position, because it sort of takes the edge off the federally mandated prevailing wage, which they may perceive as being too high to pay to an individual.
And I see questions about recording. So we are recording, and we can also provide, or your Costa can provide, not only recording but also the actual presentation, because I see a lot of people joined late. Okay.
So Lutka, so we talked about the cap, and obviously we scared everyone now into realizing that the chances of being able to get an H-1B are slim. I don't know that we specifically laid out the chances, but when people ask me, I explain to them that you have the 20,000 that are available for U.S. master's degree and 65,000 that are available for bachelor's or its equivalent. And so in order for a master's degree, a person to get, what are their chances? The chances are 1 in about 1.3 or 1.5, which is really not too bad. And then for individuals who have a bachelor's degree, those are even slimmer. I mean, then you're talking about, a 1 in 3 shot, because there are about 3 or 4 applications or petitions that are submitted for each, registrations that are submitted for each spot. And so it becomes a lot more challenging to be able to get that. So obviously what that does is it makes us as immigration lawyers turn to what opportunities exist to circumvent the cap so that individuals can possibly get H-1Bs or other visas. How do we do that? So let's talk about exemptions.
Yeah, and that's of course very important. So if you're staying in academia and you're thinking to work for university or college, that's pretty easy, because there is no cap and there is no deadline for the H-1B. So if you're getting job with the higher education, you don't have any issue, because they can do H-1B at any point. We are, of course, are not sure, which schools will sponsor. So you have to find out. We don't have a list of schools that will sponsor for the H-1B. It may vary school by school. But again, that's a great option. The only thing that you have to remember with these cap exempt organizations is, if you get cap exempt H-1B, and then you get an offer, and I mentioned that you can easily transfer the H-1B, you cannot transfer that H-1B to other organizations that would normally be subject to the lottery. So even though you have the H-1B, you would have to wait until the next year when the lottery becomes available, and then the new organization would have to file an H-1B. The only exception that we have is that you continue working for a cap-exempt organization. So let's say you work for university or other cap-exempt H-1B for 5 years per week, 5 hours per week. And then you do concurrent H-1B with the private industry, then you can do it. But the minute you lose the H-1B, the cap-exempt H-1B, you lose the other H-1B as well. So it's just something to be mindful of in case you're thinking to get cap-exempt H-1B. Another organization that is cap-exempt as well would be nonprofit organization, 501c3 organization that does research or is affiliated with higher education. And oftentimes what we see is many of the organizations, of course, colleges and universities, that's a different story, but the rest, especially nonprofits, they don't know that they are cap exempt unless they have done H-1B previously. So if you ask them, are you cap exempt H-1B organization, they may not even have an idea what the H-1B is. So oftentimes you will have to explore, and of course we help, whether or not this would qualify as a cap exempt organization. And I would say in 90% of cases, that's the reality, that these companies have no idea. So you can always ask, are you affiliated with higher education? That's easy if there is a formal affiliation agreement. And of course, you can easily find out if it's a nonprofit 501c3.
Right.
Of course, companies doing government research also will qualify.
Exactly. So that's part of the analysis that Ludka, we would undertake when we first meet with someone. If we have a prospective H-1B employer, is that employer exempt? So that might offer an excellent opportunity for the students to circumvent the cap. And I'll just quickly say, going to the issue of academia, that academic institutions throughout the United States are really just a sort of a microcosm of the real world. And you have, the bursar's office needs finance people, the admissions office needs marketing people, oftentimes the computer labs need computer people. So these are all excellent opportunities. If you get employed by by an academic institution, either by St. Peter's or by any other academic institution across the country, it lends itself to the opportunity to circumvent this H-1B cap. So the labor condition application is a precursor application to the H-1B petition. And it's one where it was implemented back in 1991. It sort of came into existence when the H-1B cap was implemented. And what it does is it requires an employer to make certain attestations about the H-1B non-immigrant, the fact that they're going to be paid the federally mandated prevailing wage. All this nonsense you hear on the news about the fact that H-1Bs are being paid, to cut, U.S. jobs is all nonsense, because the H-1Bs have to be paid the federally mandated prevailing wage. And again, that's an application that is cleared by the Department of Labor before the H-1B can be submitted to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. There are also attestations that are made that H-1Bs will be treated the same way that U.S. employees are treated with regard to the wages, the working conditions, and any other conditions that that the employer has, benefits specifically, that H-1Bs are offered the same benefits that U.S. workers are offered. And the LCA has to be posted for 10 business days in 2 conspicuous locations by the employer. And again, that is a precursor to the actual H-1B filing. So this is not a filing that's done with the USCIS. It's actually one that's done with the Department of Labor. And then once it gets approved, that approved labor condition application gets attached to the documents that we submit to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security with the H-1B. So,
Yes, here we
Luca.
are. So usually these discussions about H-1B alternatives comes around April 1st, once we know who was selected and who was not. But it just depends when we are speaking to our clients. So if we are speaking to somebody in July, there are no H-1Bs available, of course, then we first talk about other options. But right now, I think soon, after the H-1B lottery, if not selected, then we have these discussions, what to do next, what to do as an alternative. But sometimes, and I want to highlight that, sometimes there are better options than H-1B. So we like the H-1B, but we look at different things. So for example, if I'm going to hear that somebody is from Canada, I'm going to be thinking of the TN right away. Canada actually, or Mexico. So that's based on treaty. It's not a dual intent, but actually none of these visas have any type of deadlines or numerical limitations. So it's really nice for people to get the TN without any issues, no stress. And then the company can try, switch you over to H-1B and just keep trying the lottery. Similarly, based on treaty, I'm looking at E3. So again, if I see Australian passport, immediately I'm going to be thinking about the E3. It's very similar to H-1B, is for professional positions as well, but it's just for Australians. It's not a dual intent. So that's a disadvantage, but it's really great visa. Because there is no numerical limitation. You don't have to stress about the lottery. Or, and I think we didn't even talk about it at all, if you're thinking that you want to open up your own business, and you qualify for E2 visa, then don't even bother with the H-1B. Then E2 is much better option for you. So there is a list of countries that have treaty with the US. So it's for E1 and E2. It's a lot of countries. Canada, a lot of European countries, Japan, South Korea, Pakistan, many countries.
Sri Lanka, yeah.
If you are thinking that you want to open up your own business and you want to invest the money, or you want to buy a business, that's much better option for you. Just go straight to e-visa and don't even think about the H-1B, because with the E, that's kind of a form of self-employment. You're going to be able to work for yourself. That's one of the few actually visas that you would be able to do so. David talked about our visa. The same thing. If you are planning to work for a religious organization, I would just go straight for the R visa, because again, there is no deadline. You can apply at any time. So it's really nice. So don't take it literally that these are H-1B alternatives. It just depends on when we are going to be talking to you.
Ludka, I am
Yeah.
so sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to remind everybody that the Center for Global Learning is recording this session. I see somebody on the chat that was asking people for their email addresses. Please know that we do not need your email address. That is not, that person is not employed by the CGL. We will send you the recording once the session is over. So there's no need for you to post your email address on the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Luca. I'm sorry.
For example, if we see, usually the way we operate is we review the resume, and if we see that somebody has great credentials, I'm sure we would think right away about the O1. We have O1A and O1B. O1A is for somebody that has extraordinary ability in business, art, science, any type of field. It's more about person's credentials. So of course, we need to see if the person has maybe won some awards, has some presentations or publications, if there is any original contribution to the field. And, if so, again, O1 may be better than the H1B. O1B is for artists. So let's say you are studying right now, and I've had it at St. Peter's that I had people studying, I think, computer science, and they happen to be professional athletes. So I would immediately think about the P visa. So if you're an athlete, for example, it would be in P1. If you are doing, let's say you're a dancer that is doing some type, you're going to be teaching or doing some culturally unique event, that's P3. So it opens up a different door. I didn't finish O1B. O1B is for artists. It's a lower standard than O1A. But we always ask when we look at the resume about hobbies and what else do you do? Do you do any sports? It's for that reason, that it's not just the H1B, but there are different things that we could do. Even though you're studying one thing, maybe you're very, as I mentioned, you may be a professional athlete, or you want to work for religious organization and being music director. So that would be the R1 visa. U visa, David discussed.
Yep.
I visa.
For individuals who are working for foreign media organizations. So those don't have to just be newspapers or magazines. They could also be new media organizations. So all you need to do is take an offer letter with you to the U.S. consulate office or file here in the United States for a change of status. And if you're working in the United States on behalf of a foreign media organization, in whatever capacity that might be, then you have the opportunity to get an I visa.
I see one question that I think it's really important for everyone to understand. So I'm going to just read it. So for the people that graduate in May, so this May 2023, can they do the lottery right away? And yes, in the past, it was not possible. But because of that H1B registration, so this is a 4th year, it is possible, because you can do the H1B registration, or not you, your potential employer can do the H1B registration now in March. The only thing is that if you're selected, you will have to file, of course, not in April, but after you graduate. So when H1B petition is filed, you will have to have your degree.
Bachelor's degree, yeah.
Correct. So this is much better with the H1B registration, because it allows people, and actually I've seen it quite a lot. So the key is for you to have a job offer, bona fide job offer, and you can do so. And what I would say is you should also file an OPT, of course, because you never know if you're going to make it. But if you have already an employer, the employer can do the lottery. Why not?
Exactly. Great. Luca, did you covered L?
No.
Oh, okay. So that I think would be the only one that we just want to quickly discuss, which is an intra-company transfer, which is usually the way we see this shaking out is that an individual, after they're done with their degree, would leave the country for 1 full year, work for a foreign company that has an affiliate in the United States as a manager, executive, or an individual with specialized knowledge, and then transfer back into the US. And the beauty is if you transfer back into the United States with an L1A, you can easily move that to a green card, and that's an EB1 category. So for folks from China and India, that might be a nice quick way to get a green card. The sacrifice or the commitment is that you have to go home for 1 full year in order to do that.
Okay, I'm just looking at the questions. I absolutely agree. There are a lot of questions. You should always apply for OPT, because you never know what's going to happen with the H1B. And I think we didn't cover it, if you graduate in winter, that's a little tricky because let's assume you get your OPT in February, around February, for example. You only have, in reality, that 1 year. You will have to do H-1B right away because your OPT will expire next February. You will be able to do registration in March, but then you will not have legal status until October 1st. So it's a little bit tricky if you're not eligible for the STEM. So there is a little bit more advantage to people graduating in summer, because if you graduate in winter, you pretty much have to file that H-1B or do the H-1B registration right away. That's the only thing. Whereas people graduating in summer, they will have more time to talk to their employers while on OPT. And we didn't even talk about it, David. How should they approach their employers? Let's say they're on OPT. How do they ask for sponsorship? You want to give some tips?
That's a great question, Luca, and one that we get frequently. And oftentimes that's a discussion that we have in usually October, November, because that's the time when US employers call individuals in and say, well, you're doing a great job and it's the holiday time and we'd like to offer you a bonus. And, that's a great time to say to the employer, well, in addition to the bonus, which I really appreciate, I also, if you want me to stay, we need to talk about the H-1B lottery, which is coming up. And, I have been talking to immigration lawyers who have told me that it's not a difficult thing, but it's something that we need to start planning for. And so, let's start getting the paperwork together for my H-1B registration, which needs to be done in March. So, again, November is a good time to be raising the issue with your employer. But if you didn't raise it with the employer in November, it's not the end of the world. You need to approach the employer, usually it's the HR now, and to let them know that the H-1B lottery is going to be conducted between March 1st and March 18th, and that you would like to be included, in that, in the registration period. And then, of course, if you are not successful, as Luca pointed out before, then we need to take a look at some of these alternatives and start talking to you about other strategic plans.
So I see somebody has question again. So yes, if you graduate in May, assuming you really will graduate in May, you can apply for H-1B registration now in 2 weeks or 10 days or whatever it is, assuming you have the company. So it's not you that is doing the H-1B registration, you need a company. It's an online registration. And you can have several companies doing H-1B registration. So if you have 4 companies that are interested in your services, they can all file an H-1B registration for you as long as they are not related. One company cannot do multiple registration for you, but you can have multiple companies not related doing an H-1B registration. It will just increase your chances in a lottery.
So a solid example of that, Ludka, would be, let's say, someone who possesses a unique skill set in the IT arena, who, let's say, is being sought after by Amazon, by Google, and by 1 or 2 other IT companies. All of those companies, because they're completely unrelated, would be able to register for that individual in the H-1B lottery, right?
Correct.
And that increases the chances, of course, for that individual to be able to get an H-1B because they have 3 lottery tickets as opposed to 1.
I have another question for you from one student. For those pursuing masters right now, can they still file H-1B based on their undergraduate degree?
And the answer is yes. However, they will not be considered, in the master's cap. They're going to be considered in the bachelor's cap, which, as we pointed out before, the chances are lesser that you're going to be able to get it, but at least it gets you into the H-1B lottery. So, you always hear me say, if you're not in it, you can't win it. So make sure that you're in it, even if you're in it as a bachelor's. And then, of course, your chances when you get the master's are going to be higher.
If you have a US bachelor's degree, you don't need credentials evaluation. That would be only if you're using your foreign degree. You're not going to be submitting that during the H-1B registration. It's just important to have it, because what if it's a 3-year degree and it's not equivalent to the US bachelor's degree, then you're not going to qualify. So it's better to obtain credentials evaluation for your foreign degree. Just so you know, like I always require it for my clients. I know David does the same. Just so we can be sure that you have a US equivalent of a bachelor's degree, but you're not really submitting it until you file it between April 1st and June 30th. Of course, if you're graduating in May, you cannot be filing it in April. You will have to file it after you graduate. So it's a proper filing.
And consider also the fact that it's worth paying for it. You might want to question, that you're paying for that evaluation, but you're also going to need that for the green card. So you'll get a big bang for your buck there. And let's see. Any other questions? So Luca and I, we're available. And I think Yocasta and Allison know that we are always available to answer any questions that you might have. You can certainly feel free to email directly to us. I believe that Luca placed our email addresses into the chat earlier. Obviously, if you want, you can approach Allison or you can approach Yocasta. They know where to find us at all hours. So that's not a problem at all. They can feel free, you guys can feel free to reach out. If it's obviously something that we can answer quickly off the top of our head, we're more than happy to do that. If it's something that requires a little more in-depth research, we'll let you know, and we'll tell you, what would be, what the obligation might be for us to do that additional research for you.
And we can open it now if somebody has more questions. I know a lot of people were sending me direct message, but just feel free to maybe unmute yourself and you can ask a question. Some questions that I didn't answer, I just didn't understand the question.
Actually, if folks can raise their hand, because I believe I have the unmute function off.
Perfect.
Oh, okay, great.
And while we wait for that, thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I was on, but without my camera. So I'm Allison Jackson, the Associate Director for Center for Global Learning at St. Peter's University. And feel free to continue to put your questions in the chat, but definitely raise your hand. You'll see the icon at the bottom under reactions, and you can raise your hand there if you'd like to be unmuted so that you can ask your question live. And while we wait for that to happen, I was wondering, okay, so we have our first question with Ravi. I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute yourself. You can go ahead, Ravi.
Yeah, hi. Would you be able to share the presentation which you just given?
We can provide it to Allison and Yocasta, and they would be able to share it. Not a problem at all.
Yeah, so the session is being recorded. Great question. And thank you so much for being generous to share your presentation with everyone. We did a OPT workshop as well as a CPT workshop. We're going to send them all out together so that everyone has them at one time. But your presentation will be greatly appreciated, I'm sure, especially for those who missed it or did arrive late. It looks like a third of the folks who are here were here from the beginning, and then everyone else sort of joined a little bit late. So I think people will really appreciate the recording after we sent it out.
Not a problem. And as David mentioned, we are pretty flexible, so feel free to send us an email if you feel that you need more depth consultation. We do provide a discount for St. Peter students. So just whenever you call or you email us, just make sure you mention it so you get your student discount for the consultation. And I provided our website as well, so you can easily find any information. Lastly, I want to mention is we do have a newsletter. So check out our website. You can sign on and receive what's new in immigration. If you don't find it useful, just delete an email, but it has a short version of everything that's going on in immigration. And I don't remember if you mentioned it, David. Be very careful what you read and what your resources are. That's very important. There is so much information on different websites. And unfortunately, a lot of information is just not correct. Sometimes our clients just call us and I never even heard of it, what they're saying. So always check your resources, whatever school is providing. Government websites are always good. So just be, and stay away from blogs,
Right,
chat rooms, right?
right. And if it's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true, right? Yeah, but you can always check stuff with us. That's not a problem at all.
David and Luca, we have a couple of programs that are CPT Day 1, and so a lot of our graduate students are participating in that. And so sometimes students are getting a request for evidence when they apply for an H-1. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how it's typically handled?
So I have to say, I haven't seen it too much lately, but maybe like 2 years ago, I've seen a lot of requests for evidence in connection with the H-1B. So that would be RFE for petitioner for the company, for example, on specialty occupation. And then there would be a separate RFE that it's part for student to answer. And that usually was either OPT or it would be regarding the CPT, where they wanted to see employment verification letter, pay stub. They just wanted to make sure this was a valid CPT type of job, that it was integral part of your education or whatever course it was. I've never had issue with it. I do hear some people do, but whenever you submit all the documents, knock on the wood, it's not an issue. But yes, it happens. And you have to be very careful because they do check, especially when you do change of status to the H-1B or any other visa category. They will want to make sure that you maintained your prior status. So currently, if you're F-1, you're filing change of status to H-1B, they will be checking to make sure that you maintained your F-1. So no unauthorized work, nothing inconsistent. So be very careful. And that's even for the future. When you're filing for green card, you're filing adjustment of status, they will be checking your status. They will be checking your prior employers. Yeah, be careful about that. Another thing is I-94. Now it's, of course, electronic. Whenever you enter the country, always check online your I-94. There are a lot of mistakes, a lot of issues. I just had one, for example, where the individual visited Canada, came back from Canada, they never issued I-94. Luckily, you can get it corrected, but it's always to know beforehand, because once you file it and then you have a problem, that's not so great. So whenever you travel, when you come back, just make sure you check your I-94 online is all correct. Because if you're F-1 student, they admit you as a B2 visitor, that's a problem.
But they're pretty generous with corrections. It's just a difficult process to go through to have it corrected.
And it's a delay oftentimes, yeah. And we do have updated travel information on the CGL website. So I'll go ahead and put the travel documents link there. There's also some tips on what to be careful of when you're traveling as well. And I know it's been in the news lately about the layoffs that many of the tech industry companies are doing lately. Can you talk a little bit about how that should be handled if they are shifting to H1 or have an H1 pending? Like, how is that typically handled?
So if the individual, let's say, has an H1 and they're laid off, is that the question? So there is a 60-day grace period. And during that grace period, they are given the opportunity to try to find a new job. Unfortunately, most people can't do that in the 60-day period. So what Lutka and I would probably do is we would probably encourage the individual to file for a change of status from H1B to B2. And then they can always go back to the H1B once they found themselves, a new position. So there is a grace period that's permitted under the regulations, a 60-day grace period. So obviously, to get a new H1B in place is the optimal. In a perfect world, they would be able to do it in the 60-day grace period, but it's unfortunately, it's very difficult, and we're not finding that people are able to do that.
And I think from our side, on the school side, we've seen some students who have chosen to be further educated and they go on to another degree. And so they go through the change of status process again, but to F1 status versus staying in their H1. So that's also an option too. And we do have a question from Ibrahim. I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the nice presentation. My question is actually very quick. Maybe you answered, but I didn't catch it. So I will be graduating around the May 23, and I haven't agreed with any companies for sponsorship. So that means the 2024 H1B lottery will be available for me, right? Am I correct? Okay. Okay, that's all my
So
question.
now you're
Thanks.
you're going to be getting OPT. Hopefully, you have an employer. You're going to be working, you get to know them. And then, typically we start working with everyone sometimes in January, so we can file the H1B registration on
Thank you so
March 1st.
much. Thank you so much.
Can I ask what country you're from?
Turkey. I'm from Turkey.
Okay, so there are other opportunities, and this is one of the reasons why I ask, because we do E2s for a lot of Turkish clients. Lutka had referred to the E2 as an opportunity. It's where you can go to work for your own company, so you don't have to wait for the H1B lottery. So that's one thing that can be done. And also, Turkey happens to be one of those countries where the asylum opportunity might exist. So obviously, we'd have to take a look at your situation, but that's also something that we do quite a bit for our Turkish clients.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. No problem.
And I see a question about the I-94. This individual got new passport. So for the paperwork, any type of new paperwork, you should be using new passport. But I-94 might have been issued under the old one. So when you're checking for the I-94, you should use your old passport. But
And when
you're...
oh, sorry. When you fill out the I-765 form, you can always add a little addendum to say that the I-94 was based on your previous passport. You'll have an opportunity to do that if you're filing online. If you're filing on paper, you can also add a little note, but generally it's not a problem. But you do need to put your I-94 from your previously used passport in there. And do you all have any inside information or any knowledge about the fee increases that are expected? I know we're in the comment period.
It's going to take some
They're coming.
Yeah, they're coming, but it's going to take some time. It's definitely coming, it looks like, but it was just due for comments. So it's going to take time. But it is in pipes, definitely.
Yeah, I think the government is sending a message that in order not to have the issue that they did where they lost 2/3 of their employees, they're saying we need to fund this administrative agency properly. So they're screaming out for help. The question is that the public is going to scream back that the fees are way too high, and some of them are extremely onerous. So as Luca says, it's out for comment, and my guess is also it's just going to take a long time for them to figure out what the appropriate fee should be.
I see somebody raised a hand, Vulazani.
Yes. I'm from South Africa, and I was wondering if you had any country-based advice like you had for the Turkish guy. I haven't seen anything that's related to my country, for example.
Yeah, so unfortunately, South Africa is not a treaty country. Obviously, asylum is something that we've seen, but it would depend upon your particular circumstances. So that's something that, you know, would need to be examined. But I could say that the vast majority of my South African clients go the normal route, and that is, you know, F-1, H-1B, and then they do the green card based on, you know, perm labor certification process. The nice thing about South Africa, as you probably are aware, is you're not a backlog country, which means that unlike India and China, where you have to wait for many, many years for the priority date to become current, you could turn around the green card process in about 2.5 to 3 years.
Yep. Okay.
And we have one more person.
Okay.
Hi, Jade. I'll go ahead and unmute you.
Hi, good afternoon. Just a similar question, country-based. I am from Barbados, and I know the Caribbean with the US does a lot of things differently. So what advice would you have for somebody coming from the Caribbean trying to get H-1B, or just basically trying to obtain an H-1B?
Well, I'll tell you what, let's trade places. I'll go there, you come here. I love Barbados. So I think that, again, I don't know whether Barbados qualifies for E2. I would have to probably check that. I vaguely recall that it might be listed. So that would maybe present an opportunity. But again, I'm thinking that, you know, the student to OPT, to H-1B, to green card could potentially be done in, you know, a matter of, you know, depending upon how cooperative the employer is, it could be done in like a 3 or 4 year period. I mean, in theory, you could have the green card before your H-1B runs out.
Yeah,
but
I don't think it is.
Yeah, so unfortunately, so there aren't any special programs that I'm aware of. But you know, if you're a religious person, I always like the religious worker visa, and you know, getting a job at a church and working there for 2 years, and then going to the EB-4. It's a pre-certified green card. Is a very fast way to get a green card in the United States. Obviously, I don't know whether you're a religious person or not, but for, you know, for folks who are interested in religious worker visas, that's a great opportunity, and probably one of the quickest ways that I know of that, you know, you can go to the green card.
Well, thank you everyone for listening.
Yes, we are heading to wrapping up this session. We're scheduled to end at 4. So any last calls, this is your last chance. Thanks so much for staying. And those of you who joined late, as I mentioned before, feel free to look at the recording. All of the recordings are going to be going out likely by the end of the week after some editing, and you'll have them in your mailboxes or email boxes. Thank you so much to David and to Luca. We really appreciate your time and the effort that you put into helping not only St. Peter's students, but just for immigrants all over and non-immigrants as well who are looking for opportunities in the States. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay. And I guess we'll go ahead.
I think
someone did
you're
come in with a
recording. Oh, okay.
Someone did come in with the last question. I
Oh,
don't know if we
okay.
can answer and quickly. They asked if they can start LLCs on an F1. I presume on OPT.
So I'll just quickly address that by saying that there are there's sort of two schools of thought on it, but I personally do not see any issues with starting an LLC as long as you are not working for the LLC. So you're certainly allowed to own a company. As long as you're a passive investor, so to speak, and you're taking a 1099, which is for the dividends that the company may earn. So basically, if the company earns money, oftentimes, let's say these LLCs are being created for the purposes of sales online. Maybe, a sale over the internet, money comes into that company. If you pay yourself a dividend at the end of the year, it's a 1099, that is not impermissible. So what is not permissible is for you to take W-2 income from that LLC or to provide hands-on or active services on behalf of the company. Luca, do you have you want to chime in on
You
that?
covered it.
Okay.
I actually have to run.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
good afternoon,
Thank you all.
everyone. And thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone. And the recording will be out later this week.
Thanks for having us.